Now, Scotland Yard detectives say they are assessing an allegation of a sexual assault dating back to 2003 in the wake of media allegations about Russell Brand.
The former police detective who exposed Jimmy Savile for his crimes over decades ago says that since the Russell Brand story broke over the weekend, he has received a call from an individual to discuss the sexual assault allegations made against the comedian today, and that more could follow. Mark Williams-Thomas joins us now. We'll get on to the specific allegation in a second, and obviously there's a limit to what you can tell us about it, but we'll get there. But just I want to ask you generally, you're very experienced in stories and cases like these. One journalist has already said that what we've heard about Russell Brand is simply, quote, the tip of the iceberg, close quotes. What's your sense, based on your experience, this Tuesday morning, the Tuesday after the weekend that the story broke? Is this a story which has a building momentum to it?
Good morning, both. Yes, I mean, this is a story that obviously grabbed the headlines hugely on Saturday, and as a result of that, we're now following the aftermath of that. And that will result in lots of people coming forward. We've already heard a number of people have spoken to the programme. That was 5 separate women, and one person, we don't know whether it's the same person from the programme, has now spoken to the police. The situation is that the police have now said if there's anybody that's got any information or they want to talk about Russell Brand or indeed about anybody else, they should go forward to the police. The aftermath of Savile, of course, made huge changes in the way that the police and the Crown Prosecution Service and Children's Services changed their attitude and made it much more acceptable for people to come forward. The fear factor that many people had about reporting allegations lifted. And as a result of that, I've now had one person who's come forward who talked to me in relation to their concerns about Russell Brand. It's quite complicated. They've been in a position where they have felt very much in fear and very difficult to talk out. And I'm now talking to them to try and encourage them to go to the police. But interestingly enough, not just in relation to Russell Brand, I've had 2 other people who have come to me now, separate people reporting in relation to a very high profile, 2 separate very high profile people where they want to report abuse. And this is what happens when you get a story into the public domain, as it has created huge publicity. People get confidence, and as a result of that, people who have sat with the abuse they've suffered for many, many years come forward.
So these other allegations that you're talking about, let's just separate them. There's one that's specifically to do with Russell Brand, and you're saying that you're trying to encourage that person, based on what they've told you, to go to the police with what they have. And you have 2 other allegations which are not to do with Russell Brand, but are, what, household names, people that we'd all know instantly if you were to name them.
Yeah, Richard, yes, well-known individuals. And this is what happened in the light of Savile, when I exposed Savile. I had people come forward, and it was a direct result of that that I gave that information about Max Clifford and Rolf Harris. So it does cause people to come forward. They suddenly feel they've got confidence to be able to talk about it. It might be the right time in their life. They've sat with it for a long time, and it's suddenly the right time in their life to come forward. In terms of those people that come forward, my first step is always to try to reassure them and get them to in a position where they feel confident enough to be able to report that. I then help them and try to support them, and if necessary, I will phone up the police myself. I have very good dialogue and relationships with them, and I'll phone them up, get through to a senior officer and arrange a position where I can then create the position where those 2 end up speaking together. And that's currently where I'm at, to try to encourage the people to go forward to the police. The problem is that so many of these people who are reporting crimes have lack of confidence in the establishment, lack of confidence in the police, because the police, sadly, over the many years, have failed massively. And as a result of that, it's very difficult for them to come forward. There's a power imbalance, there's real fear, particularly when you're talking about someone who's a high-profile individual, because we've seen the aftermath of Russell Brand. There are those people who, of course, saying, yes, the allegations are 100% true and totally supportive. And what we need to do is, of course, listen to those people who are talking. But there's also people who have dismissed them completely, who have said these are complete and utter fabrication, totally untrue. Imagine if you are the alleged victim in relation to that. How do you feel when you've got people who are totally and utterly dismissing your story out of hand? That's a very difficult thing for an alleged victim to be with.
Mark, you have spoken to numerous people as a result of your investigations, and so I wonder if you can just answer questions that viewers are posing this morning. You've addressed it to a certain extent, but one of the questions is, why does it take so long for people to bring up allegations? One of the allegations, we understand, is an alleged sexual assault 20 years ago. And what problems does that pose for the police as they assess or perhaps investigate that allegation in terms of evidence, memory, recall, for instance?
Yeah, morning, Susanna. Yeah, one of those problems, of course, is that when someone comes forward now, people will turn around and say, well, why didn't they report it at the time? Well, the first time someone is abused, is a victim of abuse, is the most likely time they will report. Thereafter, there's a shift in power imbalance. There's a feeling sometimes of responsibility. There's a feeling sometimes I could have stopped it, I should have said something. And then it's really difficult to report it thereafter. Don't forget, some of these people are in positions where by reporting it, the impact on them would be very significant, particularly when you're talking about a high-profile individual. Will anybody believe me? What will happen to me? What will be the impact on me, my job, those people around me, my friends? So there's a real feeling inside of the individual who's been abused of, how do I report this? Will I be listened to? Will I be believed? So that's the first aspect, and that, as a result of that, that's why people sometimes sit with abuse for decades before they eventually come forward. Also, people's lives change. So if you are a young person, perhaps hasn't got dependents, as you become an adult, you then start realising, actually, do you know what happened to me could happen to them, so therefore I now need to speak up and I now need to report that. The police have become massively different in terms of the way they investigate sexual abuse. What we call it now is, we don't call it historic, we call it non-recent. So these are crimes that have happened in the past. But we must remember, of course, that those people who are subject to sexual abuse, it isn't something that leaves them, it stays with them forever. The impact on them, depending on what's happened, varies massively. Some people can get on with their lives and move on. Other people, it will stay with them for all of their life. The police now are very good. Of course, evidence is king. And there will be less evidence of something that happened many years ago than something that's just happened a couple of days ago, forensically wise, but also in relation to some of the external factors. So there are huge strides that have been made by the police in relation to non-recent investigations, and they are now very good at investigating crimes that haven't just happened.
Let's just ask you about the call that you received specifically, you say, about Russell Brand, the one that you say you're now trying to set up, a meeting between the person who you've spoken to at some length and the police, and you're in the process of arranging that conversation, that interview. We know that the allegations made in the documentary at the weekend began in 2006. We're told by the police that one that they're analysing at the moment was reported to have happened in 2003. That's the allegation. Can you tell us how far back the one that you've had a phone call about goes back?
I can't at the moment. It would be wrong to do that because the individual, it might identify that individual at a period of time, their contact with Russell Brand. So I don't want to say that. What I can say is that, those people who have concerns about Russell Brand, it's really important that they come forward and talk to the authorities, pass that information over to them and let the authorities do the investigation. I have to say, I give credit to Channel 4, the Dispatches programme. I think they did a very good investigation along with the Times, and they presented facts. Those people are being critical of it and saying, well, why didn't you just go to the police? This goes back to the point that Susanna was making, is it's very difficult for victims sometimes to come forward, and the press have a really important role, the media have a really important role through investigative journalism to sometimes put these matters into the public domain, allowing the public and victims to have confidence to then go to the police.
Mark Williams-Thomas, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Really appreciate your time. If you are affected by any of the issues we have been discussing, you can find advice and support at itv.com/helplines.